Hi there.
Hello. I'm eating my dinner in my pajamas, so I'm going out video.
Okay. Very good. Hello.
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 Hi all.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hello.
I think it's page 121.
Right, we started Lechem Mishnah that we talked about cutting the bottom challah Friday night and cutting the top challah Shabbat. Hang on. Second.
Yaakov, you're in town? Because you
No,
have
actually, I'm in Israel.
I thought the background seems different.
Right. It's in a hotel room in Yerushalayim.
Hmm.
Yes, you caught it.
Hi, Bernie.
Hi, Mario. Evening.
Page 121.
Hello.
Okay. By the way, the last one we did was Rav Ovadia, who said some break the upper loaf, some break the low, and each minhag is valid. So Rav Ovadia was quite lenient. Other halachas of Lechem Mishnah. Sometimes a person does not intend to use more than one challah for the meal, or it turns out that there's only one loaf which is ready to be eaten. Like if there's a frozen but fully baked challah roll available, may one use this as the second one for Lechem Mishnah, meaning it's not really roy lachila. Rav Ben-Sin Abba Shol writes that because such a loaf is considered bread in every respect, you can use it. Right? Mutter l'tzaref lechem kafua lechem Mishnah. You can use a frozen loaf. Rav Shlomo Zalman is quoted as disagreeing, maintaining that perhaps one may only use a frozen challah if it will defrost while the meal is still going on. And Rav Vosner takes a third, more stringent approach, ruling that one should never use frozen challah or rolls for Lechem Mishnah. It must be edible at the time that it is being used for Lechem Mishnah. However, it should be noted that often even frozen challah or rolls are still at least partially edible, at least along the outside. Says the Shmir Shabbos, Rav Neuwirth, Shomati Magon Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Yitochen, the Bishasha Lechem Kosher Ka'even V'lo Roy Lachila Neyochel Yitztarf Lechem Mishnah. When the bread is rock hard and really can't be eaten, you shouldn't use it. But if the plan is going to be to have a long enough meal that the loaf will defrost by the time the meal is over, After the choshev kroseach shetzrichim lamtim ad sheyitztanim. It's like a hot food that you have to wait until it cools down, but it's still considered edible, and you can make a motzi on such a lechem. There are other assorted related questions that the Piskei Teshuvos address. One issue relates to using pasababakistin, bread-like grain-based goods for lechem mishnah. And the Piskei Teshuva rules that they are valid for use when someone does not have 2 whole loaves of bread. He was asked, a cracker, right, refers to a broad category of bread-like grain-based foods, which is sometimes function as light snacks, other times functions as the basis of meals. We discussed this all in volume 13. Ein le'el b'simin kuf sameches, u'b'mishnah brura b'yarlocha. B'sham nizbar b'mishnah brura, Seif Kot Lamedalad, Al Piadarche Moshe, who was the Ramah of Ataz, Usharach Roinim, Shenohagim Lakbid Velola Kachas Lechemishna Pasabah Bekistin, Sheberchosu Mizonos. You should not use something that is considered Pasabah Bekistin, which normally the brachos mizonos. You shouldn't use that. Elapas Sheberchosu Amotzi. You have to use a bread that the brachos amotzi. The Bir Halacha Sham in a maskir inyan zebim mefurish. The Bir Halacha doesn't mention it directly. Aval dan sham, he discusses le'inyan mine pas bekistin. He discussed certain type of these bread-like, grain-like baked things. Asher bizmaneim haya lekinuach v'ta'anug v'zmanenu asui l'soifa. That in his time, they were used as desserts, but in our time, you can actually be filled on such a thing. Especially if you are kovea suda over it. There, you could certainly use that product as lechem mishnah. If you don't have bread, the kovea sudos al mine mezonos, and you're going to be kovea suda on these mezonos. Vada yesh libtzol shneim shleimim. Take like a whole cracker. Uvishas atchak ukshe'en lo shleimim al shnei prusos. Or even if you don't have a whole thing, just broken pieces. You should use 2. Or if you only have 1 loaf of bread, yitzarif min mezonos. You can add the mezonos. As long as it's something that you would use for a suda. And you should eat these mezonos as part of your suda. In order for you to satiate yourself. For example, to dip your other foods in. This way you're going to be yotze for everybody. Look at the footnote. According to Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, one reciting Kiddush on the zonos should do so ideally with 2 whole units, such as cakes. However, other poskim do not accept this novelty, and this practice has not been accepted in most places, as noted by the Piskei Teshuva. Does a loaf need to be perfectly whole in order to be used for lechem mishnah? This was also addressed in the Piskei Teshuvos. Uvachronim matzim ladun b'mahut v'geder hasholem. What's considered that you need a sholem le'inin lechem mishnah? To summarize their words, the Hidur mitzvah is to have 2 complete loaves that are separate from each other. But if there's just a blemish in the loaf, or b'matzah, asher lo nikar kol kach, which is not recognizable. Uleinei bnei adam nirav nikra sholim. When people look at it, it looks like a sholim. Mikor dedina shapir dummy. It's okay. V'lachen kishe'olfin kama chalot b'tavnit achad. When you're baking many challahs in one tray, v'shelo b'miskavin koresh nogim in mokimad echad b'shay. Sometimes these challahs stick together and they become attached. When you separate the loaves, one loaf might look deficient. You see that they had been stuck. If you look, the general person who looks at it sees it as a sholem, that would be okay. The Shari, in footnote 27, the Rosh says a challah with less than 1/48 missing is still considered whole, while the Re holds that the challah is not whole. That you have two challahs that are somewhat attached, they can also be considered lechem mishnah. But you should preferably separate them, since some people disagree. That's the opinion of the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa. But the Shmir Shabbos says if you separate the loaves and there's a piece missing, the other piece would not be considered a sholem. So it would seem that all opinions would consider breakaway challah, which consists of different parts that merge together during baking, as one challah, since the intent is for them to merge together as one. Many of us have those challahs, and it looks like it's considered one challah, not like 8 challahs. The Piskei Tshuva discusses what a person should do when one of the loaves for lechem mishnah falls apart or breaks into 2 parts, and no other whole loaf is available. In nechtach ba'ofen shenikar chisaron, if the loaf has been broken in a way where it's recognizable, you shouldn't use it for lechem mishnah, because if you have another one that's a sholem. Even if it hasn't been broken into 2, there's just like a crack in it. There's a crack. The gather is if you pick up the smaller piece on the side of the cut, and the whole thing wouldn't pick up, then you know it's dino kinechlek legamri. It's considered not sholem. Aval kishein tachas yadu lechem acher sholem. Now, if you don't have another whole loaf, you can sort of connect the 2 parts with a toothpick or something else that makes it stick together. So if you pick one piece up, the other piece will come below yishmat. Most people are accustomed, in accordance with the Gemara above, to recite Hamotzi on Shabbos over 2 loaves. The Yalkut Yosef mentions that some have adopted the Kabbalistic custom to use 12 arranged loaves at each meal on Shabbos. Because the Lechem Aponim, which the Kohanim would place on the Shulchan on Shabbos, had 12 loaves.
I've never seen that. Has anyone seen that?
I think I've seen it by Hasidic Rebbes.
Yeah, I saw it by the Tzadikur Rebbe. That
Yeah, by Rebbes do.
Wow. Okay.
Because of the Lechem Aponim. Serious amount of chalas.
Yesh nohagim al pi ariza laniach al shulchan yud beis kikoros ketanim l'chol suda. Shisha al gabi shisha, 6 on top of 6. Kimin pamayim nikud segol. In the shape of 2 triangles. V'lochim shnayim tsoim, you take 2 of the middle ones and break them. Even if you're not a Kabbalistic person, you can do that. kavonis v'chadoima einem el misha maven b'kabbalah. It's the mystical intentions. That's when they say that you shouldn't have something to do with Kabbalah if you're not in it. But having the 12 loaves, he's saying, is okay. Just the comment that most of us have the minig that the Lechem Mishnah is put in front of the Balabayas. And he's Yotze for everybody else, the Lechem Mishnah. It's not noyeg necessarily, although you see it in some places, where each guest is given his own Lechem Mishnah. I guess that's Lehidur. But certainly your Makayim through Shomer Ko'oin, it's one of the examples with Shomer Ko'oineh, you are Makayim an action, right? The Shomer Ko'oineh technically works on the Amotzi, but the Amotzi is being made on the Lechem Mishnah. And everybody who answers, and if you have the proper Kavanah, each person is Makuy in the Lechem Mishnah part of the din of the Amotzi that you're eating.
The note 31, the page is very nice, is the 12 loaves from the Kabbalistic perspective correspond to the Lechem Apanim, which were 12 loaves. But I vaguely recall that one time I asked one of the Chassidim that came that had it in our Shul for Mincha, and they said it also corresponds to the 12 stones that Yaakov slept under that combined as one, and there was another remez to that
Okay.
thought.
Okay, we just had that recently in the Parsha. What about the special food and its connection to Oneg Shabbos? Kugel, Trulent, right? As we saw at the beginning of the Shir, the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos includes serving additional delicacies and tasty foods as part of the Shabbos meals. The Rambam formulates this idea in the following halach in Hilchos Shabbos. Ezeu Oneg, Chazal told us to make a very fatty dish, umashkeh mevusam, and a nice perfumed drink, l'Shabbos. Hakol lefi mamona shel, everything according to the financial status of the person. Whoever spends more on expenses for Shabbos and on finding very special delicacies for Shabbos is praiseworthy. The Shulchan Aruch writes that a person may make a concerted effort to honor Shabbos with additional foods, despite the additional expenses this may entail. The Gemara recounts the story of a Jew named Yosef, who was diligent about buying delicacies for Shabbos. He was known as Yosef Moiker Shabbos. In the merit of his habit of investing in the answer of Shabbos, Yosef came to substantial wealth. That's the story where he would buy a fish, and the fish had an expensive jewel in it. Only a person in very dire circumstances is instructed to refrain from spending a lot on Shabbos. Someone who is dependent on other people. But if he has his own personal finances, it's a Shabbos. He has to push himself to spend something special for Shabbos. V'lo amru asay Shabbat chol, v'al titzarach lebrios. They didn't say treat your Shabbos like the weekday rather than come on to other people. That was said only to somebody who is literally in dire straits. The person who doesn't have too much assets should save money during the week, maybe give up some of the things he's eating and spending during the week in order that he'll have a little bit more for Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah details more of what should be served at the meals as part of Oneg Shabbos, such as fish, but that this is not necessary for someone who does not enjoy it. Moreover, he adds that the community should take care to prevent local vendors from taking advantage of the market and gouging prices. You should have two different cooked dishes. Gam tov sheyochel b'chol suda migimel sudas dogim. You should eat fish at every of the 3 meals. Im lo she'eina oisin lo lefi tivo shesoina, unless you hate fish. B'Shabbos loinig niten v'lo l'tzar. Because Shabbos is given for pleasure, not to be in pain. Then, im moichrei adagim yakrei ashar, if the fishmongers were raising prices, the rabbis should paskin, don't buy fish this Shabbos, to teach them a lesson. Until through supply and demand, the price will come back to where it should be. Od kosov sham, you're not negating by avoiding fish because you can do other foods. So I heard from someone I used to daven with at Young Israel Hancock Park, Rabbi Avraham Englenov, Zichrona Livracha, right? He's not, Walter, he passed away, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
Abe Englenov. Why do we eat fish? He used to say, Ochlim dag biyom dag.
He passed
Shabbos
away.
is- Huh?
He passed away.
He passed away. He said, Ochlim dag biyom dag. Shabbos is the 7th day of the week. Dag, Daled Gimel, is 7. So he would say that the remez for eating fish on Shabbos is because it's the 7th day of the week. That's one thing. Then I've heard that the Rebbes, you notice the Rebbes make a big point of always eating fish at the Tish, and they give out the fish as shrayim. That, again, these are things that we don't know anything about. These are Kabbalah things, but in those that discuss Gilgulim, that if someone hasn't been Mesakein, what his neshama is supposed to be Mesakein in one lifetime, sometimes the neshama is sent back another time to Olam Hazeh to be Mesakein whatever it was missing. That is, someone has once explained to me, right, 1 million infants were killed in the Shoah. I mean, what was that all about? So when you're killed by being a Jew, you're Makayim the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. It could have been there were millions of neshamas during the thousands of years that fulfilled every mitzvah but no Kiddush Hashem. And perhaps that was the point of that whole thing, that their neshama went through a process of Kiddush Hashem. I've heard that. That's one of the things about Gilgulim that resolves some theological issues. But what am I talking about the fish? That I think in the Gemara says that tzaddikim come back as fish sometimes, because fish, they don't have ayin hara, right? It says Yosef is compared to dogim, and there was no ayin hara by Yosef, and also fish's eye is always open, so he has a good eye. So the tachlis of the fish is reached when the fish is offered on Shabbos and it's eaten by the tzaddik, and that's the final takon, how the tzaddik finishes his purpose in this world.
I think it was from a Baruch Simon, that the reason they eat fish is because fish have no averis. Even animals, they can hurt human beings and stuff, but fish don't have any averis and don't do any harm to humans. Not talking about sharks and stuff, edible. And therefore, that's what we eat. That's why we eat it on Shabbos.
Okay, there we go.
Just-
So if we could, I have a piece of fish or something. I mean, it's not the time. Yeah. Eating and drinking additional delicacies outside of a meal also helps to fulfill the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos. Moreover, this also allows a person to recite additional brachos. The Gemara Masechta Menachos relates that Rav Chia went out of his way to recite additional brachos on Shabbos and Yom Tov. This is because a person should recite 100 brachos every day, it's much more difficult to attain on Shabbos and Yontif when the Amida, instead of having 18 brachos or 19 brachos, only has 7 brachos. So you have to find, that's why we're making Bar Minei B'Samim. Chaim Eisenberg comes around sometimes with special things to smell, and you make a bracha, because on Shabbos, it's very hard to make the Mea brachos.
No,
That's probably the rationale for the Kiddush Club.
But that's special for Yom Kippur. There's a special halacha on Yom Kippur. On that the 100 is even harder to make because there's no food. So that's how we do all the different basamim on Yom Kippur.
But you see, even on Shabbos, there's a reason, because it's not that easy, even with the food, you know. By the way, they do the Chassidim as well. If you go to a Tish, even Friday night, they have besamim there, and they make a bracha besamim even before Kiddush there. And I think it's part of that. So Menachos Mem Gimel Amid Beis Tanya Reb Meir Oimer Chayvadim Levarich Mea Brachos B'Chol Yom Shenemar Ve'ata Yisrael Mo Hashem Elokecha Shoel Me'imach. The Ma'a is Al Tikra Ma'a Ela Mea. All right, that's the limud there. Rav Chibarei Rav Avi Shabtav Yomita V'Torach B'Malilu Baspipar B'Isparmaki Umagdi. They would eat spices, or they would make blessings on spices and sweet fruit to make to fulfill the quota of Mea Brachos. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Reish Tzadik, Yarbe v'Peiros u'Megadim u'Minei Reach. You should make bracha on smells. Kidei lahashlim minyan Mea Brachos. When discussing how to fulfill the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, it's also important to note that according to the Gemara Masechta Pesachim, the mitzvah to honor Shabbos day takes priority over Shabbos night. Says in Masechta Pesachim Kufei Amud Aleph, Kavod Yom v'Kavod Laila Kavod Yom Kodim. So how do you implement that? The Mishnah Berurah says if a person has limited delicacies that could be used at either meal, you should leave them for the daytime meal, as opposed to the Friday night meal. The Aruch HaShulchan notes that keeping the better foods for the daytime meal only applies if the tastiness or quality of the food does not decline over time, or one would have to serve it cold on Shabbos day due to the prohibition to reheat liquids. Therefore, this halacha is more relevant to fruit, drinks, or sweets. In addition, serving cholent at Shabbos lunch also seems to fulfill this halacha of pushing the delicacy to the day, because the covet of the day is greater than the covet of the night. So now we know the reason why the cholent is eaten at the day. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you don't have too many delicacies. Leave it for the daytime. In the Yam Shel Shlomo, the Sefer Yam Shel Shlomo, Korei Tagar al She'ein Nizarem B'zeh, he complains about people that are not careful about that. And V'adarav Moisim B'lo Shabbos, people who make great efforts to make their Friday night meal like much grander than their Shabbos lunch. That's not really the intent. You should read the Gemara. The Gemara tells us that the covet of the day is greater than the covet of night. Why does the honor of the daytime have priority? The Aruch HaShulchan explains. Hatam the covet yom koidim nearly. Mishum dikari asur sem b'yom v'obalayim. The main meals are eaten during the day rather than the night. V'od b'layla lo ochal bayom be'erev Shabbos. The Friday night meal, you've also eaten lunch. V'yefsher lios asuda chaviva lov k'vyom HaShabbos. The Aruch HaShulchan is saying that people go into Friday night meal already a little satiated. Less so Shabbos day when you haven't eaten anything all day. V'od. The B'mikdash Ikra Kedusha Nikeres B'yom. The Kedusha Shabbos was seen She krivu bo korban musaf. The korban musaf was makriv in the day. V'lo b'layla. Lo haisa shum avoda shel Shabbos. There was no Shabbos avoda at night. What about Torah study and sleeping on Shabbos? We mentioned earlier that Oneg Shabbos includes other activities besides eating. The Meiri, along many other Rishonim and Achronim, identifies learning Torah and resting as additional forms of Oneg Shabbos, based on a passage in the Talmud Yerushalmi. This point is explored with some depth in the Pnei Halacha. He calculates the amount of time a person should strive to earmark for Torah study based on the principle that the day should be split between activities which are for you and those which are for Hashem. So the Meiri, in his comments on Masechta Shabbos, mitzvahs oinek Shabbos gedoyla ad moed. This is a very great mitzvah. Uvishami amru b'meh ma'ango. How do we fulfill oinek? Mar Omar Beshina. One Mandomer said with sleep. Umar Amar b'Talmud Torah. And the other Mandomer said learning. V'lo pligi. Kan b'Talmud, kan b'Balabayis. So the more there are answers that a Talmud Chacham, because that's what referred to as a Talmud, would get his oinig with Torah, and a Balabayis would sleep. Upirshu ba Rabboisai. She'atamid ma'ango b'Talmud Torah, Balabayis b'Shina. Says the Meiri vani oimer hefachad for him. She'atamid sheshoyne kol yimei hashavua. The Talmud Chacham is learning all week. Mekayim b'Shabbos oinig Shina. So his oinig on Shabbos is to sleep. Shelo yesichlo lo ayoter midai. It gives his mind some rest. The Balabayas, who's in business all week, Roy Loli Sasik Mat B'Shabbos B'Talmud Torah. Derech Oinig. He should learn a Geschmack Toisvet on Shabbos to get a good Oinig on Shabbos. V'hu sheraiti sham lo nitnu yamim tovim Shabbosos el lasuk ben b'divrei Torah. That Shabbos and Yom Tov were given for this. Ayideshu tariach b'chol ve'en lo pnai. Since Balabayas is working all week, he's been given Yomim Tovim and Shabbosos to learn more. Nidlo Yomim Tovim and Shabbosos lasuk ben b'divrei Torah. So the Meiri is presenting two different approaches to studying Torah as a form of enjoying Shabbos. The Meiri's teachers argued that the Torah scholar should dedicate Shabbos to learning Torah because he is the one who naturally enjoys learning. The layman should enjoy Shabbos in another way. The Meiri himself, in contradistinction to his Rebbeim, suggested the opposite, that the layman who is burdened by other responsibilities during the week should make a point to take advantage of the respite of Shabbos to enjoy learning Torah. Earlier, we briefly related to Torah study as one form of owning Shabbos. Aside from the unique pleasure afforded by learning that's mentioned by the Meiri, many sources point to a fundamental connection between Shabbos, when work is interrupted, and learning Torah. In this vein, the Ramah also suggests that Shabbos is a particularly appropriate time for laymen to engage in Torah study. The Shulchan Aruch goes further, writing that the time after the Shabbos morning meal is customarily earmarked for studying Torah subjects, such as Nevi'im and Agadah. Today, common practice is somewhat different, both concerning the timing of Torah study on Shabbos, as well as the subjects often studied. Says the Ramah, upoalim ubali batim, workers and lay people, she'eina noiskim b'Torah kol yimei shavua. They're not learning Torah during the week. Yasku yoser b'Torah b'Shabbos mitabei chachamim. Haoskim b'Torah kol yimei shavua. They should actually learn more on Shabbos than the Talmidei Chachamim, who learn all the week. The Talmidei Chachamim yamshichu yoser b'oinig achilu shestiyat tzas. Talmid Chacham gets an opportunity on Shabbos to eat a little bit, drink a little bit more. Darehem is angim b'limudam kol yemei Shavua. They have oineg all week. The Mishnah Berurah expands on this. Ita b'midrash, Amra Torah lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Torah homiletically said in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel olam, Kishikansu Yisrael La'aretz. When Klal Yisrael is going to come into the land of Israel, Zeh Ratz LeKarmel. This one is going to his vineyard. The Zeh Ratz LeSadeh. This one is going to his wheat field. Ani Matehei Alai. In the desert, 40 years, it's like everybody was in Koila. What were they doing? They were getting Mon Min HaShamayim, so they could sit and learn Torah. But now the Torah realizes that when they come into the land, they're going to have to work. What's going to happen with the Torah? Omar Yeshli Zog Shani Mezavik Lecha B'Shabbos Shmo. You know what? Shabbos is going to take care of it, because Shabbos Heim B'Telim V'Lachlam V'Cholim Lasik B'Cha. On Shabbos they don't work, and they'll be able to study you on Shabbos. That's the medrash that the Mishnah Berurah quotes. He doesn't say which medrash it is, but it's an interesting medrash.
Notice he doesn't say they have to sit and learn the whole time. They basically have to work during the week, and Shabbos is for learning.
So v'ha'ikar yeh az l'lamed l'rabim es chukei Elohim es Torasa. So he says that on Shabbos there should be public lectures by the Rav to teach the laws, l'haros halachos, especially Hilchos Shabbos and Isser v'Heter, v'Isser v'Muter, meaning kashrus and anything tarsa mishpacha, anything where there's Isser and Heter. And gam l'hamshich leva shomim b'agada, there's good agadata that could be taught to attract the heart of the people, which is madrich es ha'adam l'yiras shamayim. Ukedi isa b'yalkut, reish parshas Vayakhel. This here he quotes from the Yalkut Shimoni. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe, Aseh lecha kehilos gdolos. Assemble large crowds. Udrosh lifneim barabim hilchos Shabbos, and darshan in front of them all the laws of Shabbos. L'hoyros Yisrael Isser v'Heter. Lo k'mo shenogim achshav. He says the Mishnah Berurah lived up till 1933. He says the rabbis aren't doing this anymore. They're teaching, they're giving sermons, about maybe about politics or what. I mean, the Mishnah Berurah is saying you have to teach halacha, hilchos Shabbos, hilchos Isser v'Heter, and he's not happy with the way what's being taught on Shabbos to the people. The Piskei Tshuvos is one of several recent poskim who addresses the importance of learning Torah on Shabbos. V'yom HaShabbos hu yom muchen u'mezumen lilmod bo. Sheyesh bo skula mitzad, the Shabbos is a special day to learn. Sheyesh bo skula mitzad yisron ha'nefesh sheba'od. There's an extra soul in the person. L'hoya l'chol ha'mavakesh Torah, and that's going to help you learn Torah. Ki al yedei neshama yisera chalav shafa eloki. When you have this extra neshama, you have like a godly spirit. The seichel yoiser lasuk b'Torah. You have like more wisdom to study Torah. Ula'ayin b'ma'is Hashem. The gadola mifala naseh meisek haTorah b'yom HaShabbos elef pamim yoiser min hanaseh meisek haTorah shemos hachol. He says that what you achieve learning Torah on Shabbos is 1,000 times greater than what you can achieve when you learn Torah during the week. Because that Klal Yisrael gathers every Shabbos in the shuls and in the yeshivas, this is a way of coronating God in His world. The Aleihem Omer Hanavi, Vatem Eidai Neum Hashem. You are my witnesses. Va'ani Kel, and I'm your God. Atem Meidim Alai Shani Eloka Ba'olam. The Pnei Halacha of Eliezer Melamed also addresses this topic that describes Shabbos as preordained for the sublime pursuit of Torah learning. Mitzvah la'arbos b'limud Torah b'yom HaShabbos. V'amru chachamim lo nitnu Shabbos yomim tovim el lasuk b'hem b'divrei Torah. The Yerushalmi says that Shabbos and Yomim Tovim were given to learn. Odamru chachamim kach chomer l'makadosh baruch hu Yisrael bonai lo kach kosafi lechem b'soirasi. I wrote in my Torah lo yamush sefer Torah zemipicha. This sefer should not leave your lips. V'gisa b'yomam v'layim. You shall recite it day and night. Avu pi shatem oisim locha kol shisha yomim. You work for 6 days. Yom HaShabbos yasa kula Torah. Shabbos should be malei Torah. Mikan amru, lo yom yashkim odam v'yishna b'Shabbos. Wake up early and you should study on Shabbos. V'yelech l'beis HaKnesset l'beis HaMedrash. Go to shul. Yikra b'Torah v'yishna b'Neviyim. You should read the Torah and the Haftorah. V'achar kach yelech l'beis v'yochel v'yishna. Then you should eat and drink. L'kayim ma shenemar lecha chol b'simcha l'chmecha. We should say believe tuv yenecha koelos. The Pnei Halacha goes further. I'm reading the footnote 39, makes a detailed calculation to determine the amount of time that should be spent learning Torah. The sages tell us that we must divide our time on Shabbos. Half of it should be spent studying Torah in the Beis HaMedrash. Half should be spent enjoying Shabbos through food, drink, and sleep. Some maintain that it's only on Yom Tov that the division is meant to be even, but that on Shabbos, which is designated for Torah study, one must dedicate more than half of one's time to Torah study. However, most poskim maintain that on Shabbos too, one should divide the time evenly, with half one's time spent on Torah and half on physical pleasures. We see that in practice, one must dedicate at least 6 hours to study Torah every Shabbos. Although most individuals are unable to easily dedicate 6 hours to Torah study on Shabbos, one sees from it the great importance of establishing fixed Torah study on Shabbos specifically. In addition to Torah study, we saw that the Yerushalmi also mentions resting as a form of Oneg Shabbos. Although we saw that according to the Meir and the Ramah, lay people should specifically set aside time for Torah study, the Tur, Shulchan Aruch, and Ramah, among others, all mention that taking a nap is a worthy source of Oneg Shabbos for some. Says the Ramah, Rogil, B'shinas Tzarayim. If a person is used to taking a nap in the afternoon, al yivatlenu, you shouldn't give that up. Ki oineg hulo, it's a special oineg for him. Although the Ramah refers to one who frequently rests in the afternoon during the week, the same should presumably apply even to one who only rests on Shabbos, but not the rest of the week, since he still considers this to be enjoyable for him. In accordance with the other sources, we have seen, the Mishnah Berurah writes that the Ramah's position does not mean that someone should sleep away a large portion of Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mikol Mokom lo yirba bo yoser midai, shelo yavienu de bitul Torah. You shouldn't slumber for too long. That's going to lead to bitul Torah. Shafilu tamei chachamim, shalomdim kol hashavua. That tamei chachamim that learn a whole week, shemitzvah she's angu biyoser, who have a greater mitzvah of oneg on Shabbos, ein aperish shibolu kol hayom etanukim. You shouldn't spend the entire day in delicacies. Right? Yemashku yoser betanuk b'shab ne'odam. When it says that Talmidei Chachamim should spend more time than the Balabatim in Tainug, it means they should spend more time than other people, but they should still not use the whole time and waste away the time for Torah.
He also quotes, someone once pointed this out to me, and I made a note of it, in the Mishnah Berurah over there in 290. Pnei Yeshua quotes that the Ari Zal slept 2 hours every Shabbos. He says, and it's a good biddik. So that's what he says there.
Okay.
How he knows how much the Ari slept on Shabbos, I don't know, but that's what he says.
Well, we have in the Gemara cases where the Amoraim would sleep under the bed of their Rebbe.
Right.
They were probably spying out exactly what the Gemara did.
Right.
Okay, what about Suda Shlishis? We learned above that there's a mitzvah to eat 3 meals on Shabbos. One at night, one in the middle of the daytime. When should one eat the third meal, known as Suda Shlishit. The Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, 118a, records a source which states that if a fire breaks out, it is permitted to salvage a certain number of meals, depending on what time of Shabbat it is when the fire breaks out. On Shabbos afternoon, you can save one meal. From here, Tosfos infers that this is the time of Suda Shlishis. B'mincha, matzilin mozen Suda achas. You can save one meal. Mikan mashma, desman achila Shlishis b'Shabbos, himina mincha lomala. From mincha time and on, not like people would, like they'd eat at 8 o'clock, they go to an early minyan, come home and eat at 9 o'clock, and then eat again at 11 o'clock, both before Chatzos. No, the Gemara seems to imply that the third meal should be after Mincha. Now, we know, I believe this year, Erev Pesach is going to be on Shabbos. And there are other times, for example, when Erev Yontif is on Shabbos. So there, Erev Pesach, yeah. You don't want to go into the meal, the Yontif meal at night, having eaten something. So there we do a thing where we have two meals in the morning, and we bench, and we take a walk, and then we have another meal.
Well, there's a part of the problem, Ernie, is not just the meal, it's that you want to have a motzi, and we can't have a motzi, we can't eat matzah after midday on Shabbos, because there are
Yes, you can't eat matzah, and therefore you do, that's another reason to do it. But one of the reasons also is because there's a special inyan of going into certainly the Seder, with an empty stomach, and therefore we certainly don't have Shalosh Shudas at the normal time we have Shalosh Shudas on those days. We move it up earlier. And Chanami, on Erev Pesach, there we can't have matzah yet, and we have to have a meal. So we do it all in the morning. And then after the Zman Isser of Chametz, so there are multiple reasons why we do it in the morning. But for example, when Yontif, Erev Yontif, first night of Sukkot is Saturday night. Or the first night of Shavuos is Saturday night. So there also, we don't have Shalosh Shudas in Shul, and we do it early in the morning.
I don't know if
You don't have to.
No, you could do it. You can still do that. You can still do it a meal at whatever. You do it at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, but most people don't.
Yeah.
Like certainly the shuls don't have Shalosh Shudas, so they sometimes tell people do it in the morning. Now we'll see.
Shavuos is actually less of a problem because we can't start davening till so late, and you don't start davening Mariv till 8:30 on Shavuos usually. So usually, even if you're having a Shalosh Shudas at 6 o'clock, you're not eating dinner until 9 o'clock anyway.
But the shuls will not make a Shalosh Shudas then, because there's a special din of on Erev Yontif, you're supposed to go into the Yontif somewhat hungry.
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe we'll see. Maybe it's better to follow this Toisus. Maybe Erev Pesach is a special din because you have to have bread and matzah you can't have. So then you have to do it then. But maybe for the other ones, it's better to do it after Mincha because you see this Toisus suggests that it has to be done after Mincha. Zman Mashiach Zman Mincha. Dainu Mishei Shosu Mechzel Mala. V'Masa Kodim L'Chein L'Kai Mitzvah Suda Shlishis. So right now it's from the 6.5 hour on when you should start having Shalosh Shudas. We saw that the Rambam writes that one should drink wine at Suda Shlishis. The Mishnah Berurah recommends fulfilling this. Tov lahadi levarech al yayin tocha seuda. Most authorities do not agree with the Rambam. Common practice today does not follow the practice of having wine during Suda Shlishis. See above that having wine during the meal is a function of Oneg Shabbos. One is not obligated to do so if one does not specifically enjoy having wine during festive meal. Generally speaking, the poskim acknowledge that there may be some distinction between the first two meals of Shabbos and Seudah Shlishit. The Rishonim disagree regarding the minimum standards of food which would constitute a third meal. In addition to requiring wine at Seudah Shlishis, we also saw that the Rambam writes that a person must eat bread to constitute the meal. By contrast, according to opinion cited by the Ran, one fulfills the obligation even by eating something as modest and informal as a fruit. Says the Ran, "Ikenami man domer demashlim lu beperi." You can fulfill Suda Shlishis with fruit, uvamine targima, with some herring, with some delicacies. Kidamina perkayashan. You have to eat 14 meals during the 7 days of Sukkot. And there we don't necessarily need bread. Even fruits would consider a meal. In contrast, the Rosh writes that what does it mean, mine targima, varieties of delicacies? It refers to grain-based goods, over which a person recites the bracha of borim and mizonos. So at least you have to have mizonos, right? Ubetes tesefta mevarkim ketzim mevarkim tanya, says the Baraisa. If you look of mine targima, in the sukkah they bring him some delicacies. Mevarch alei and borim and mizonos. So we see from here, says the Rosh Mashma, the mine targima hainu Michael shasuim chamesh zaminim. That when the Gemara in Shabbos refers to Minei Targima, it has to include Mezonos. You want to eat some cold cuts, or a piece of chicken, or some cheese alone, just the protein. No, the Mezonos are more choshev. So, what's the Psak Halach in the Shulchan Aruch? The Shulchan Aruch writes that a person is obligated to eat bread at Suda Shlishis. Nevertheless, he notes the other opinions. Tzarech lasoiso pas. Then you could use the 5 species of grain. Then that you dip your bread in, like meat or fish. And then he quotes the most lenient opinion, the Ran. He says, Svar Rishona Ika. When it says Tzarech Lasoisa B'Pas, that's the Svar Rishona. The Shulchan Aruch is telling us that's what you should do l'chatchila. Should Tzarech Lasoisa B'Pas. Elim Ken Hu Saveh B'Yoser. If he's very full, and it's going to actually cause him distress to eat more bread, then he can rely on the other choices. On the basis of this rule of Shulchan Aruch L'Ad Poskim, the Piskei Tshuva writes, the halachic order of preference of what should be eaten when a person is unable to eat bread at Suda Shlishi. Rakesh Akar Mikra Shel Oinus, only if an unevent, you can't prevent, for example, you're too full, or you're sick, you can't use the bread. The preference list is like this. First, lefachos kebetza pas. You should try to have a betza pas and at least a kazayis. Mine mezonas kebetza, at least a kebetza mezonas while kolponim kazayis. Or tavshil shel chameshes minim, dogon. It's some cooked dish of grain. Val kolponim kazayis. Or tavshil shel basar v'dogim, some kind of cooked meat or fish, or tavshil sheirokas or peris, or some kind of cooked, like a quiche or fruit, something cooked, a tavshil. Right? That comes before fruit. So, like a fruit soup would be a tavshil shel peros. Then peros meshivas aminim. Fruit of the 7 species. We're talking about dates, figs, pomegranates, right? Not apples and oranges. You want the sheva minim first. Then revius yayin is the next. Or peros or yerokos chaim, raw fruits and vegetables of other types. These items, you should ensure that you have at least kibetza. If you haven't had bread and you didn't wash, yizar ma'od, Shlo yimashech achilaso u'shesiyaso la'achar shkiyas hachama. You shouldn't tarry in your eating and drinking so that you continue to eat after Shkia. Why? Once Shkia hits, there's a new din. Isra achila koydem avdol. Just like we have Kiddush, and you're not allowed to eat before you make Kiddush, once Havdalah becomes in the Parsha, and it doesn't become in the Parsha until Shkia, you're not allowed to eat until you make Havdalah. So if you have not washed, you should be careful if you're eating all these other things to stop eating and drinking before Shkia. We will discuss this later on in Shiur 4 when we deal with Havdalah and how you can avoid this problem, etc. In summary, the poskim write that although it's clear, the produce, 2 of these species, wheat, barley, are included in the grains. The other 5 are olives, dates, grapes, figs, and pomegranates. The footnote 42 says the cooked dish of grains, like is pasta. The brachos mezonos, they're not pasa baba kisnin. Remember, pasa baba kisnin, if you're kovea sud on it, you can make a motzi on that. So a tavshil of these grains is something that would not have that would only have a mezonos, even if you are kovea sud, because they don't fit together of pasa baba kisnin. We have to review those gedorim. The poskim write that although it's clear that one should eat bread at Suda Shlishis, eating other foods instead is considered a substantial meal. Why does the halacha have a more relaxed standard for Suda Shlishis? The Shevet HaLevi, Rav Osner explains, Bir advarim diyesh hevdel ben beis sudos da'ayu regilim kach lechol b'zman chachamenu. The first 2 meals, even Chazal ate those meals. And they ate them during the week. Rav Osner says they needed bread at those meals for sure, because those are the 2 main meals you ate during the week. Amnam Suda Gimel, which is just this additional meal on Shabbos. He hosafa lo mitam Suda Sayom. It's not that this is the regular Suda Sayom you're eating, Mikudesha Sayom. It's because it's a holier day. V'geter mitzvah lachein dafka b'zeh dai b'minei targima. That's why this concept of minei targima is enough. Given the kvar sod suda regila b'osayom, you already ate your regular meals. One final issue related to Suda Shlishis concerned the order of Suda Shlishis in the field of Mincha. Is it acceptable to eat Suda Shlishis before davening Mincha? This is addressed by the Shmir Shabbos Kilchos, who writes based on the conclusion of the Ramah that it's preferable to recite Mincha first. If one is unable to do so, then one may recite Mincha after Suda Shlishis. The Ramah writes that it's preferable to recite Mincha first due to questions about fixing a meal before reciting Mincha. But since many opinions hold that this applies only to a very large meal, such as a wedding feast, one may rely on them if it is difficult to eat Suda Shlishis after Mincha. Although the Mishnah Berurah here limits the leniency to one who begins before the time of Mincha Ketana, the Shmir Shabbos is lenient even after that time, since the Mishnah Berurah earlier writes that the custom is to be lenient even after the start of Mincha Ketana. Says the Shmir Shabbos Kilchos, Noagim l'shpal tchilat tfilas Mincha. The minig is to daven Mincha. Mikol makom im kasher olechol Suda Shlishis achrei tfilas Mincha. If it's hard for him to do that, yachol olechol osakorim tfilas Mincha. He can eat it before Mincha. Mimachtis hashah achrei chatzos hayom ve'elech. From half an hour after chatzos, 6.5 hours. As long as it's after that, you can eat the meal. Now it's the 9.5 hours of the day. 2.5 hours before Shkia. You could still eat. Don't delay the davening mincha too long. The machshava we will do next week, and we will start the dinim of Motzei Shabbos Navdal. Any comments, questions, Aros? Okay, so tomorrow's the Lanyado event, so some of us are going to that. Otherwise, next week, Tuesday night, will be the same, it'll be back to Tuesday, and I'll send an email, and Mario will send a text to everybody to remind. I wish everybody a good Shabbos.
Are we allowed to learn next Tuesday evening?
What? Is it the 25th?
24th.
It's
24th?
the eve. It's
Oh,
the eve. It's
Yeah, I just listened to a 2-hour, about a 90-minute lecture on Mark Shapiro, by Mark
Yeah.
Shapiro, on Nitzelnacht. Yaakov, you've heard it?
I have a number of
Yeah.
times. Yes.
Yeah, so there's some fascinating things to say about that.
Maybe we can play Kvitlach.
We can play Kvitlach.
I think the conclusion
uh,
is it's
but
not
we-
a
we
problem
What was
can
the
do it.
learning.
I
conclusion?
mean,
What does Mark Shapiro say?
First of all, the issue was going out. They
Correct.
didn't want people to go to the shuls. We do art by Zoom, so it's
Yeah.
really less of an issue. And he really there's really a struggle to find sources. It's all from like the 1500s. It's a very late. There's no early sources for all of this, for these minhagim.
Well, pogroms, I suppose that, you leave the house, you get beat up. I mean, with the drunk goyim.
But Harold,
Yeah.
there were dinim where you didn't have relations with your wife. Did you know that? That was part of nittel.
Can you talk quieter? Magda's around.
I think
Meaning,
halachically.
so it wasn't just, there was something going on that had to do
It's
with right that